What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek. He's Sodek. Today we are trying high-fiving each other. Come on, Sodek, high five. Psh, nailed it.
Nice.
And today we have for you our monthly Modern Metagame update for June 2022. Let's go. Alrighty. So as you can see, we are emitting our explanatory segment that we always put in those videos because we figure out that in spirit of shortening our videos even more, we'll just put it on YouTube with a link in the description. So if you still haven't watched it in any of our previous videos, go down, there will be a link to it in the comments, and we can just start, or in the description rather, and we can just start right away with the tier list.
Before we start, I think it's still important to say that if your pet deck is not here, if there are no more positions in C, D, E, F, etc., it's not because it's nowhere to be seen in Modern. It's more because the power level of your pet deck, at least we believe that the power of your pet deck is not powerful enough, not high enough to have a huge impact on the
Sodek is trying to be really polite, but in reality he's saying that your deck is worse than blue-white control, so you know.
Yeah, and before you ask, all of you, why Dredge is still here?
Because Sodek love it a lot.
I like the deck, so that's why. But all other decks had at least some results in the last month, so that's why they are here.
Exactly, couldn't have said this better myself. And we'll just start with a brief recap of each tier, and then we'll go more in depth about decks that changed their positioning. As you can see, we have 4 changes. We have 1 new deck in Grixis Death Shadow, or Grixis Ledger Shredder, as Canister likes to call it. He was the person who won a challenge with it, I think last weekend, so week and a half, 2 weeks ago, when we were watching this video, most likely. Then we have downgrades on Living End and Blue-White Control, and we have an upgrade for color. Beware that it's 4-color Blink, not 4-color Elementals. We will cover all of that in depth later on. So we won't talk about S tier now because it will be a longer discussion later on. A tier, still the same. Still all those decks, all those 5 decks are just really good decks. Very stable.
If it's really hard to go wrong if you know what you're doing by playing them. I think that the biggest skill gap for all of this is probably in YAV mode, because I saw like the difference when the experienced player is navigating the turns and when the newer player is trying. Like, for example, I was watching the whole Modern Showcase when Xerc was playing, and the decision tree in this deck is just insane. And like there are so many moments when you can outplay the opponent that I was very impressed how the deck was able to keep rebuilding after the endless wave of removal. That was kind of impressive. Hammer is quite similar, although like there are more non-games involved. Like sometimes you just have your turn to attack for 10, and that's good enough in some spots.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say basically when you start to do Vyogmov, that I do think that Hammer has the similar skill disparity between results disparity when it comes to skill as Yogmov. Like when you watch like Laplacian or Crusherbot BG or any other really Happy Sandwich or Sandwich. Happy Sandwich, I think, but maybe it's Happy Sandwich. I don't remember. Also,
Tortilletta.
Yeah, Mario Gomez 097, a bunch of like really good Hammer players. They just it's night and day compared to like first time Hammer enjoyers. But yeah, I would say out of these 5 decks, these 2 are definitely the like hardest ones to master. I do think that the remaining 3 decks are relatively straightforward. All of those. Probably Rhinos have the most play to it out of them, but it's still like pretty similar. Okay,
Yeah.
B tier, we have the Shadow, which is a new addition, as I've already mentioned. We have Affinity, Amulet, and Burn, just like we had last time. I was thinking about putting Burn into C because it didn't really showed up, I think. But at the same time, it never shows up too much, so it was fine just not moving it, I think.
To be exact with the Burn's positioning, it had 2 slots in the last Modern Showcase. Like it was a tournament for over 400 people, I guess.
2 slots in top 8?
Sorry, in top 32.
Okay.
So that's, in my opinion, a reasonable positioning for the deck. Especially when the whole field was really stacked with great players. So I think this was a fine showing. Also, I was even considering playing Burn for this tournament because
I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah, there's one big problem for the deck. It's the Murktide matchup. It's an uphill battle, but outside that, I feel that the deck. And of course, Hammer is a real bad one. But your match versus 4 color versus Cascade decks is quite good. Also, the Rise of the Shadow is something that Burn is quite happy about. It's not like
True.
the matchup is great for Burn because after all, the Shadow can grow quite fast when you send Burn to the face. But there are some factors that make the Burn at least a reasonable choice for like future events.
100% agree. Then we have C tier. We have 2 Sodex decks. They're Belcher and Dredge. We have Tron, and we have Blue-White. And I don't really know why Blue-White was higher up last time. For some reason, I just had more faith in it. I don't know. It's probably, I don't know. I just felt adventurous last month.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Jędrek, it was because Mr. Kafuet and Tapa had very good results on challenges.
Okay. So I know that for a while, like week or 2 ago, you were pretty high on Belcher. So tell us why you thought that Belcher was a good choice back then, and why you think that now it's back to being not great.
About all these all-in combo decks, they have the very good and bad matchups, but they have one thing that's the same for all of them. They have a reasonably good matchup versus 4 color. So as long as 4 color is very popular, grabbing these all-in combo decks like Belcher, Calibrated Blast, Oops, All Spells, and like Underworld Breach, whatever else you can think about, it's not the worst idea ever. And like 2 weeks ago, Belcher had its showings in Modern Challenge top 8s, like thanks to Ben 49. I had like the week before it, I had I lost my win and in to Living End, so it was kinda sad. Still, I thought for a second that Belcher had a nice positioning, especially when, for example, Living End players were trying to play without greaves, but with more subtleties to adapt to more endurances in the field, etc., etc. Nowadays, I feel that like elementals are a bit lower, for color with counter spells is a bit higher. So it kind of negated the fact that Belcher should have a positive result versus Risen Reefs, because Risen Reefs are not seen that often anymore. They're still around, but not in that like high numbers than like 3 weeks ago. Also, other decks, like for example, Yavmod started adding again Necromancia, so it's not as free as it was like 3 weeks ago. I still believe that Belcher, among all these combo decks, Belcher can compete because of its option to go for turn free quite often, and because of its grinding potential versus lower decks, because of pies with Pact of Negation, etc. But it's like the moment to play Belcher is gone, and I as a Belcher player, I'm probably focusing more on playing other stuff like Yavmot or Living End instead of hitting the wall and trying to prove to myself that Belcher is again greatly positioned. I just want to wait for like a few weeks until 4-color starts dominating again, and then I can activate Belcher for 3 mana and be happy about it.
Makes sense. So now, finally, let's talk about S tier. Because basically, if you are an active Twitter user and you are following a bunch of Magic personalities, mostly from States, you could have an impression that, or you could be under the impression that 4-color is by far the best deck in the format, which is, in our opinion, that's not true. It is true, though, that we, or most of all I, am biased the other way around, because most of the time when I'm talking with other great modern players, aside from Sodek, from Canister, from like Polish people that I just talk to on regular basis, I am talking to people like Doomswitch or Piegonti or Pachi, and they are all really good Murktide players, and they like Murktide a lot as well, or Blue-Red, however you want to call it. Because at some point we probably won't see any copies of Murktide in the deck, or at least a limited number. It's like, but I guess in Legacy you are still calling the deck without Delver of Secrets Delver, so it's kind of whatever, it's just semantics. But yeah, like there is this very big difference between what like America based and like I guess Canada, so like Northern America community thinks compared to what like European / Modo community thinks. I do think that it kind of comes from this like self-fulfilling prophecy that at some point a couple really good American players got good results with 4-color, and they just start talking up 4-color a lot to all their friends, and at this and then more and more great American players started picking up that deck. And right now, for the last 2 weeks or so, every single player that I know and respect their game, that I see on Twitter, and they're from States, they always play 4-color. Like every single good player there, or like 95% of them, are playing 4-color. It is very similar to the situation that happened on SCG Tour like 4 years ago or whatever, when there was like 4 or 5 Canadians who were playing Amulet, and they've had like 40% conversion rate to top 8. And everybody that was following like the NA Star City narrative was like, okay, then Amulet is broken. And in reality, it wasn't that great. And I think it's pretty similar, because I don't think it's a secret that tournaments in States are pretty soft in general. I don't mean it as an insult or anything. I just think that an average person you never heard about in States is worse than an average person you've never heard about in Europe. Mostly because I don't think European players get that much coverage because like Magic is obviously inherently more skewed towards American coverage, and we don't have our own Star City in Europe. So like there is a lot of people who play really, really well that if you're from America, you've never heard about, because they are like top, even if they are top 18 a GP every now and then, they are mostly like putting themselves like top 32 or whatever, which is a really good score. You have to go like 12-3 or something. And you don't hear about them because there is just no recognition for them. And that's kind of sad, but yeah, that's basically it. I do think that American tournaments are easier in the first rounds. Like I do think that good American players are great, just like good European players are great. Like the top is the top everywhere, basically. It doesn't matter. But I think that the first few rounds, every time I see this like feature match in the early rounds of Star City, when it's a person who's the reason that the feature match is on this table, like someone really well known, like, I don't know, Tom Ross or Edgar Magayesh or any other person who are getting a lot of coverage attention back there, and they are playing against somebody I don't recognize, like a local person, they are always so bad. Or usually they are just like, I know it's kind of painful, but the skill gap is so visible from the first, like, it's just visible from the first glance. Maybe it's because you are on camera and you are a bit nervous. Like, I get that. I get it's not a setting that you are in every time. It's probably your first time on camera because, well, you are relatively unknown. So, but yeah, like, I think that, like, it's just maths, right? I already mentioned Star City grinders who had like 40% conversion rate to top 8, and it wasn't one person. Like 40% was the most, of course. I think there were like 1 or 2, maybe 3 people over 40%, but there was like 5 or 10 people who've had all over 25%. And it's like ridiculous. It's unheard of in professional Magic, other than like Star City or whatever. Like, I think the most top 8s at GPs still belong to Yuza. I think Yuza has over 30, like 32, something like that. So imagine that he top 8s quarter of the GPs he's going to. Like, Yuza has been going to GPs for like 20 years. And he's traveling all the time. He's at so many GPs. He's playing, I think, at least like 15 GPs every year. He's playing every European GP. He's traveling to PT, so playing GPs that are sides to the PTs and stuff like that. So I think he played in like 300 GPs probably, something like that. And he top 8'd 10% of that, which is 4 times less than the person who top 8's the most Star City events. That's a lot.
Okay, Jędrek. So maybe you can focus again on Magic instead of players. So, in your opinion, is for the people's opinion or for color is overrated? Are everyone
Definitely
overrated for color?
Definitely. It's also because Twitter is very prone to exaggerations, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And don't get me wrong, 4-color is, in our opinion, the second best deck in the format. So we don't think that 4-color is terrible. We think 4-color is pretty good, but it's not the best deck.
So another question. Like, I will ask you a few questions. Maybe I will also try to say something more if I don't feel that you
already exhaust the topic.
Do you think that any bans are needed? Because I saw a lot of discussion about should we ban Yorion, Omnat, Vren, whatever.
Short answer, no. Long answer, no. But I could see, like, if it was up to me, if Ian Duke calls me on my cell phone and I'm picking it up and I'm like, what up, Ian? And he's like, what up, Jędrek? Listen, we need somebody to do some stuff to ban this. You can ban 3 cards from the format and they're just banned. and there is no outrage, nothing. It just everybody like wakes up tomorrow and it's just in their head that these cards are banned, and they are acting like those cards have been banned forever or whatever, and like it's obvious you can't play with those. Like, I don't know, they are in the same place as like Skull Clamp or whatever.
Okay.
I would ban. In reality, it's 11 cards, but I would ban Companions, which mostly means Yorion. But I would just ban Companions because why not? Because I think Companions are really bullshit. And then I would ban 2 similar cards that maybe are not as similar at first glance. And those cards are Ragavan and Rant 6. Why I don't like these cards and why I think that those are similar? Because they do something that I heavily dislike in Magic, which is punishing person who's on a draw even more. They are very snowbally cards, and if you win a die roll against Ragavan or Ren, it's much easier to answer them than on the draw, which is something I don't like. But once again, I don't think that bans are needed. This is something that if I had a free reign over the format, I would do, and very well I might be wrong. Also, I don't think that just banning Yorion is enough to, like, I don't think that just banning Yorion makes 4-color significantly weaker, and what Twitter would say, that it's not enough to make it not the best deck by far in the format, but it's not the best. You know what I'm saying. I don't think that Yorion is enough if you want to just really weaker 4-color. I think it has to be Ren. I think Ren is really fucked up card, and it's something that, like, specifically pairing of Ren and Omnath is so insane, and it never has been a problem in Modern without Omnath. Like, every time Ren acts up in Modern, it's paired with Omnath or another like blue cards, like it was good with Cryptic and Mystic Sanctuary and stuff like that. But it's never like Jant, it's never red green. It's always like a blue mid-rangey control-ish pile of cards with Ren.
Yeah,
so,
that in mid game happens to have more mana than Tron, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, if I could pick my 3 cards, I would say Endurance, Force of Negation, and
Unban Breach from below.
Unban Golgari Gravetron. that would be my picks.
Very objective, very well reasoned. But yeah, also, like, it's something, I don't know if you ever realized that, because like it's not something that's apparent at the first glance because it's 80 instead of 60, but you are playing a 4-color deck. Like, 4-color plays 29 or 30 lands, or 28 sometimes, in 80 cards. It's like playing 21, 22 lands in the 60 card deck, and they are playing a 4-color deck that wants to cast 4 drops. So it's obnoxiously greedy.
Yeah, like it's greedy, but on the other hand, having more cards in the deck means that you flat more often.
Not really. That means you sometimes have more severe flats, but like you like can get like you have bigger like shooting variance, so you will still flat as much, but your flats will be worse more of the time, I guess. But what I wanted to say, you can play these few lands because you have Ren and 6 in your deck. Because 2 lands with a Ren is unlimited amount of Ren lands if you have at least 1 fetch land. So yeah, Ren and 6, Ragavan, Yorion. If I could ban them, I would, but if they're not banned, I think this format is really, really good anyways.
Okay. Another question. Do you think that, in your opinion, does 4-color have any bad matchups?
Yes. I think 4-color is a deck. I think Canister said it pretty well. He called 4-color a deck. Like, it was a discussion we've had on Discord with other people I already mentioned, like Doomswitch, yada, 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 about what's the best deck. And there was a pretty good summary along the lines of Murktide is a deck that's comfortably over 50% against the field, and 4-color is a deck that's slightly ahead of Murktide in this matchup. Like the Murktide 4-color matchup is slightly better for 4-color, but 4-color at large has like 45% matchup against the field or something like that. Because, as you already said, Sodek, like weird combo decks that are very linear and don't care about card advantage, they usually tend to be very good against 4-color. But Murktide kills those decks, and then 4-color can shine.
True. Like it is, I think it's also a similar situation with Living End. Living End is quite good at dealing with, or like Hammer, they are quite good at dealing with random decks, but they can also kind of struggle versus prepared opponents, or for example 4-color, because they have a lot of reactive cards that can matter.
Yeah, I also do think that even though I cited Canister on 4-color being ahead in the Murktide matchup, I don't think that's the case. I do think that's the case if you are playing Dragon's Rage Channeler, because it will just match up poorly against Renin 6 a bit too often. But if you are doing what great Murktide players have been doing for many months, or less than many months, I know that Patchy independently has been working on no Darcy's, and after my like countless hours of nagging from my side, I know that both Doomswitch tried it. I think Doomswitch liked it kind of right away, but was a bit too shy to drop Darcy's. But he tried it, he really liked it. And
he won the challenge.
Yeah, and then Piegonti went kind of the same way. And I think if you don't have Darcy's, you are basically at a coin flip with 4-color if you play it well. Because I do think that if you treat Murktide as a tempo deck, especially in the matchup, you will get in trouble because you will have this innate pressure on you to, well, put pressure on your opponent, which I don't think is the case. I do think that actually, if you escape like first, I don't know, 3-4 turns of the game unscathed in the matchup, you are the favorite. Like, if you untap in your 4th or 5th turn and they don't have a Planeswalker or Omnath on the table, even if you don't have creatures as well, you will be favored in my opinion. Because
your mana is more, like you can use your mana better than your opponent.
That's the first thing. You will flood less often because you run compared to them less lands, fewer lands, even if you take into assumption that they are playing 80 cards. And your 2-for-1s, like, they don't have as many counter magic. And if you, like, they won't stop you from resolving your 2-for-1s as much as you will stop them because you have more counter magic. And their 2-for-1s are, well, as most 2-for-1s need to resolve to actually be 2-for-1s. So, like, for example, I don't know, you resolve Jace, you brainstorm, they kill it with Prismatic Ending, you are a card ahead. But if they try to cast Omnath, you will have one of your many counter spells to counter it fairly often. And then it's a 1-for-1, even though Omnath is a 2-for-1 card. And you answer your 1-for-1 cards can answer their 2-for-1s in a 1-for-1 fashion, and their 1-for-1 cards can't do the same thing to yours most of the time. Like, they still play counterspell and stuff, but like, I know that Solitude. Yeah, like a lot of people try to like approach this in a like protect the queen fashion, which is inherently flawed in my opinion, because they have too many removal spells, their removal is too efficient, and you lack tools like Daze or Wasteland to truly impose your tempo on them. So, like, don't protect your creature. If they want to kill your Ragavan, just let them do it. Unless it's with Renin 6, then counter Renin 6. Like, focus on countering their Planeswalkers and their Omnaths, basically. And Yorion, of course. And I think if you approach the matchup correctly, then it's more or less the coin flip. I've been winning a lot, but also, like, in general, I've been winning more than an average player. So like it's also like it's always a bit flawed, right? Because we are better than an average player and we are winning more than average players. But I've been winning a lot. Like I think I went like I don't know, like 8-2 in matches against 4-color in my last 10 Premier Events matches, like PTQs and challenges and whatever. So, or even 9-1. I don't know.
That's a reasonable
yes.
take. Okay, another
Murktide
question.
is the best deck. Play Murktide. Yes, you can ask your questions. Okay.
Another question. 4-color Omnat versus 4-color Elementals. Why 4-color Omnat is higher than Elementals?
Short answer. Full disclosure. I took almost this exact quote from Twitter, but it's a pretty obvious thought, so pretty obvious statement. So yeah. Expressive Iteration is a better card than 3-mana Elvish Visionary, which Risen Reef is, more or less. And Expressive Iteration is fucking bonkers. And you should play this card if you can. And if by doing that, like you are also playing Counterspell, which is a pretty great card. And it gives you this insulation against all this nonsense that you usually lose to. Like basically, what I think that playing the Counterspell Iteration version of 4-color and playing a No Dragon's Rage Channel version of Murktide is doing the same thing from two different directions, because like tempo decks, and people are treating Murktide as a tempo deck even though they shouldn't rather, are good against linears but can be trumped by bigger mid-range decks. And 4-color is the other way around. It trumps mid-range decks, but can be exploited by linear decks. So what this is doing is you are taking away a bit of your power when your deck is already good, because I do think that the Ragavan Counterspell pairing is already giving you enough high ground against linears that you can trim those excessive 1-drops in channelers, especially if you are replacing them with Ledger Shredder, which is completely different topic, and Ledger Shredder is busted. In favor of being more like having more muscle in those mid-range fights. And similarly, you are cutting a bit of your Elvish Visionaries and those like grindy play to the board elements in favor of having a bit more velocity and having a very versatile stack-based answer. So you're basically taking from your strengths a bit and adding more than you are taking to your weaknesses, I think. Which is a really good move in my opinion. It makes your deck much stable, and as we already said a bunch of times, all of like A+ decks in Modern, so S and A tier, are really strong when they are doing their thing. And the S tier decks are doing it more consistently, and they are more stable and have lower failure rate. And that's what the most important part is. And doing what I just described is establishing this even further.
Yeah, like we even like said that like the whole tier thing is making your powerful thing more stable than all others, and that keeps being true after all this weeks and months of playing.
Basically, the only deck on this list that is not doing that is Burn. Burn's thing is not powerful, but it does it very well. And if it's enough, then it's enough. If it's not enough, then it's not enough.
Yeah.
And every other deck has their own powerful thing. And Burn is just Burn. We are just casting lava spikes, which is fine.
Yeah, sometimes Eidolon is something that...
sometimes Eidolon is this powerful thing. Yes, I do agree.
Yeah, because sometimes you play Eidolon turn 2, Murktide player does not have removal, starts to play cantrips to find the answer, and then dies.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes your double 1-drop or triple 1-drop opening is also this powerful thing that you are doing. But in general, Burn is by far the least impressive deck when it's good out of those.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on to Living End, or do you have more questions about S tier?
I I'm probably fine with S tier. I can now talk about Living End a bit.
Go ahead.
Living End's position is quite interesting for me because there are a few interesting factors. First is that Living End, for instance, won the last Modern Showcase. So there's a clear showing that the deck is still very powerful and can win tournaments. So why it's not on S tier and it's on A instead? In my opinion, enough players keep the height to keep it in check, to make it like show its full potential. For instance, like from 2 or 3 weeks ago, a lot of elementals were around, and elemental decks are playing endurance main deck plus a time is called to find it plus a lot more height in the sideboard. So elementals alone were good enough to like trim the number of living end players at the top tables. Also, other decks like for instance Murktide, Yavmod, Hammer, like every other deck that's near the top has dedicated cards to stop living end. It can be a lot of endurances. It can be some form of Chase of the Voids. It can be like endurance in the main deck. For instance, Rhinos players are more and more playing like from 2 to 4 copies of endurance. Or Hammer players who play Spell Pierces main plus Lavinia, Teferi, and more counter magic in the sideboard. So it's harder and harder to just do your regular thing. For instance, like you have one interactive spell, bunch of cyclers and cascade, and that will less often be enough versus the opponent. That's why I'm putting Living End lower. And I think that it will be extremely hard for the Living End to go to the B tier because the deck's raw power is just incredible. And it's more about finding your right position or like finding your good hands when it matters. For instance, when you're playing versus 4 color, like there's a matchup when you want to start with Grief and keep fun and like cycle through a bunch of stuff. Like when Living End draws 2 or 3 interactive spells for 0 mana, then it's extremely hard to and these spells match up well with what the opponent is doing, then it's extremely hard to beat it at all. So if I had to pick the deck like and play for my life, I would probably pick Living End still, even if it's not at the best position ever. I would just play it. About the other Cascade deck, Rhinos, there was like a moment when we were talking like in the last update that Living End is just more powerful and can have more non-games, and Rhinos can be stopped in more regular fashion with, for example, a bunch of solitudes, ephemeris, etc. I believe that like people are so focused on beating Living End and Living End specifically, then there are fewer answers just for Rhinos. For instance, I don't see that many engined explosives anymore. I see more stuff like Fluster Storm, which is still fine versus Rhinos, but it's not as good as specific iterations because hello.
Engineered explosives.
Thanks. Because it can like deal with more than one cascade spell at once.
Yeah, I would go even further. I would say people are not cutting those proverbial explosives to add Flusterstorms. They are cutting explosives and other endurances. And
For instance.
or Grave Hate. And like those cards are not good against Rhinos.
Yeah, they are not, for sure.
So yeah, Rhinos definitely benefit from I think it's kind of interesting because Rhino Living End matchup is good for Living End, but Rhinos benefit from people hating out Living End. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
True.
Also,
And
I kind of wanted to add on top of what you said about Living End. Yeah, basically you nailed it. It's like I already mentioned it. Like Living End is very similar to me to Bazaar decks in Vintage. Like people finally understood that they need a lot of hate to win against Living End. Like we are not playing like 2 relics like you played against Dredge or whatever. You have to have like 6 sideboard cards or something that are like good sideboard cards, not like, oh, this is my, I don't know, mystical dispute, not very good. Yeah, you have to have like chalices and flusterstorms and like Tormod scripts or relics, like really impactful stuff. Yeah,
True.
that's it.
Maybe we can focus now on the Death Shadow or
Yes.
like Grixis Leather Shredder, because like the consensus was that Death Shadow after the Lurus ban is kind of unplayable, mostly because black cards are just not good enough to compete. But things have changed with the printing of Ledger Shredder, because Ledger Shredder does one thing very well. It makes your bad draws alive ones still, because the biggest problem with Focis is that when you draw it late, it does nothing, because current decks in modern top deck quite well. So it was easier to and more efficient to keep counterspell up instead of relying on Focis. With Ledger Shredder, it's not as problematic, because now when you draw your Focis and you don't need it, you can just discard it relatively easy. So as a result, Canister showed the version playing 5 discard spells, like 4 Focis, 1 Inquisition. After playing the deck, he even cut 1 Inquisition, played something else. So the deck looks very similar to Murktide, but instead of Murktides, they are playing the Shadows, and instead of having more counter magic, they are playing a mix of Focis and counter magic that can also act as a removal in the form of the Drown the Log. And every other things are basically the same. You still have a bunch of removal, you still have Ragavan, you still have other cards, and you have a companion in form of Giganta. Sometimes it's kind of laughable, but sometimes 5 mana 5/5 can just end the game, or just be another card to discard for Ledger Shredder, because more often, like when I was playing Ledger Shredder, mostly in Pioneer, but still, like grabbing Giganta just to be able to discard it when opponent casts 2 spells was extremely powerful, because it felt like a free value.
Yeah,
So
it's literally an additional 8th card in those cases.
yeah,
But yeah,
that's true.
well, as far as Death Shadow goes, I do agree that it's kind of similar to Murktide. I do think that Counterspell is a better card now than Drown in the Log. And I do think that you don't really need black cards. Like, you don't need Shadow, you can just play Murktide. I think this card, even though it's better with Shredder, it's still not great. Spell Pierce is a better card than Focis right now, I think. And one thing that I guess kind of interesting is splashing black in the blue-red deck. Because I think that Murktide can benefit from splashing, potentially. Like, I do think that there are certain cards that would be nice to have. Like, I think, for example, Doomblade is a nice card to have, because without Lurus in the format, like, it's a pretty damn close to being a 1 and a black Terminate. Because Lurus is not there. Like, you can't kill Yawgmoth, okay? Which is a pretty big downside. But other than that, you can kill most stuff. And most importantly, you can kill Shredder and Murktide in the mirror match. Another card that's pretty great is Kolagan's Command, because then you have an answer to Unlicensed Heart in the mirror, which is like actually resource positive for you. And Unlicensed Hearts can really warp mirror matches of Murktides. So I don't think it's worth it yet, or at least I haven't figured it out how to splash to make it worthwhile, but I do think it's something that would be interesting to explore. But
Okay,
it's still
question.
like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Question. Do you think, okay, imagine that your friend says, I'm playing Grixis Shadow, end of story. Do you think that, say, like, what would you say to your friend? You would say, sure, go for it, or Murktide is a better version of the deck?
I would tell them to play Murktide, but I would also tell them if they really want to play Shadow, they should play Shadow. Like, I don't think it's like, I've went on about many times about how I do think that playing the worst version of a deck is one of the cardinal sins that a Magic player can do. And it's still accurate here, but not to the same extent as it was before.
So,
I do think that you actually are actually offered something, but it's mostly also ties to the misconception that people have about 4-color, because one of the most compelling arguments that sounded like actually people believed in that when they were hyping up Shadow was because you get to play Turak against 4-color and now your matchup is better, which falsely feeds into this into this narrative that 4-color is good against Murktide, which I don't think is the case. I think it's once again a coin flip.
So, do you think that Ledger Shader was enough to put Death Shadow back on the map? And is it more the help of the Ledger Shader made Shadow and Forces better? Or is it more about another Ledger Shader deck that has better removal than Murktide? And the deck could be also good even without Death Shadows? And like a Grixis Ledger Shader without like this life loss team would be an option?
I think that it's definitely an option. I think that you can easily just play like maybe even no Murktide deck. Like you are playing like Shredder, you are playing Ragavan, you might play Dreadhorde Arcanist. I know that Soulstrong was trying that a while back. And then instead of a nerf, which I think is a really cool card to have with Ledger Shredder, you can actually play Claim to Fame, because all your creatures. Let me pause for a while because I have to change the battery in my headphones. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, Claim to Fame, which is an Hour of Devastation card. It's like an nerf, but it can also it only reanimates creatures with CMC 2 or less, and it has an aftermath, so weird flashback style effect, which is target creatures you control gets +2/+0 and haste until end of turn, which I think is a really big deal with Dreadhorde Arcanist, because then you can flashback Expressive Iteration, which sounds really, really good. So maybe something in this space, like you play Shredder. You mostly need Murktide, I think, right now with Shredder in the mix to have it for the opposing Murktides that your opponent is playing. Like, I do think that Blue-Red, once again, because I'm advocating to cut Murktide right now, it's weird to call it Murktide. Like, it would have the similar impact as Ragavan banning had on Legacy, when at least that's what was initial the consensus. I don't know if it's still true, like if people still believe that, but I've heard many accomplished Legacy players saying that after Ragavan got banned, it actually improved Blue-Red's win rate overall, because Ragavan was most important in the mirrors, and against other non-mirror decks, it was not that great, but you needed to have your own to compete in the mirror. And I think Murktide is to some extent a similar card, that you don't really need Murktide, but you need it because other people are playing Murktide. So if all Blue-Red players just shook their hands and said, okay, we are never playing Murktide Regent again, and we are supplementing our deck with like more counter magic or more removal or more cantrip or whatever, I do think it would be better for the deck. But once again, you have to play
I'm not that sure, because Murktide is like, it's killing quite fast. And
Shredder is
there are
killing really
matchups.
fast too.
Yeah, like if you can afford to play Legend Shredder turn 2, then sure, that's true. But I saw a lot of games when like opponent was keeping counter spell on the time, when I had my sorcery speed, for example, Belcher, and like if I'm playing draw go and I'm playing Belcher, for instance Belcher, I'm feeling quite good about my chances in a matchup because I can just wait and like play my bite spells and eventually go for Belcher with Pact of Negation backups. But like the whole situation changes when the opponent goes for turn 4 Murktide with counter spell backup, and then I know I have 2 turns of life. And
That's true.
like, like Murktide alone, maybe it's not the most important thing in, for example, in like other top tier decks. Or for example, if you are playing versus Yavmot, like being able to attack them quite fast in the air is great. Although
Murktide lines
it
up
loses to
pretty poorly against Grist, which
I was
is
saying
a big problem. And Shredder is like enough of a battlefield presence against specifically Yakmov, I think.
okay.
Like
But
I
what's
guess
like
you could play like one Murktide if Murktide wasn't enough in the mirror, because it's the first one is really cool to draw pretty often. It's the second one that you draw a bit you draw too fast, but with Shredder you can discard it. I don't know. Like maybe 3 Murktides is okay anyways. I don't know.
maybe like I feel that like after all you are going to the modern tournament and you'll play maybe 60% against the decks that you see here. Maybe 70.
I would
But
say
there are
much
still
more.
like let's compare this like MTGO to like Paper Magic. I think in Paper Magic it's more likely that you'll see something else
Okay.
from the list.
If I go to a paper event right now and I play 10 rounds, I would assume I would play 6 out of those 10 rounds against decks from S and A tier. On average.
That's a lot. 6
And
is a lot.
I think that would happen.
I would say 4 out of 6 of SAA and 6 out of 6 if you include B2.
I would say even 7 out of 10 with B tier in the mix.
Okay, we'll never know, probably. Or maybe
We'll never
just...
know, but I do think that Modern still has this kind of a myth around it that it's a format with 50 million viable decks and you can play anything you want, which is just not true anymore.
Not
And I do think that these like 11 decks that are in SA and B will be a vast majority of decks that you see if you go to like a big tournament.
Yeah, sure. But there are still, you know, a lot of C tier decks that can have its weekend. For instance, Belcher 2 weeks ago. For instance, there was the big Moke who was playing 5 color Omnat, more likely, you know, bring to light Scale Shift. That's the deck that
it's
can
basically
happen.
like I think it's basically like playing for color, but you have your monocle on to look smart. Like it's basically the same deck.
Kinda no. Like, you know, Dryad and Valakut plan like changes a lot.
It's a similar pivot as Elementals. You are just trying to go over your opponent in the mirror match.
But instead of, you know, card advantage, you go to combo out them.
Yeah, but it's still the same deck, more or less.
More or less.
Okay.
I would say less than more, but I get your point. I got your point here.
Yes.
Still, like there are a lot of decks that you can play against, and you can if you are playing Murktide, there are a lot of like C tier decks that can be prepared to beat you, and like if someone really wants to beat you or like have a 55% matchup, then that maybe can happen. Yeah. After all, like, okay, do you think that the average level of okay, we assume that the best players will play the best decks, or there's a big correlation in that. Do you think that we are in the times when players who are emotionally connected, or they are too stubborn to try something else, and they are playing their pet deck from C tier, they are more likely to be worse at Magic than players who decided to go for something from the higher tiers.
On average, yes. Of course, there are exceptions.
Yeah, there
Like-
are a lot of players who are really good at playing their pet deck, and they can
yes.
still have results. For
Yeah,
example,
for example, if you're a
Xenoan
Frenchman, you get a 10% win rate buff when you're playing blue-white. That's just a fact. Like, if you ever shook Waffle's hand, you get another 5%. I have,
Yeah,
so
so
that's
if-
why
if
I
Waffle does something
sometimes
like this-
I do I do win with blue-white sometimes.
yeah.
But yeah, like, I just think that you have to broaden your attachment a bit. Like, if you were like, oh, I always played deck, like, I don't know, I always played Devon Taxes back in Modern 2000, I don't know, 16 or something. Or I played Humans in 2017. Like, just find another deck that's on the list that's somewhat similar. Which can be
Kinda hard though.
tougher for some decks, but also, like, are Humans that much different from like Hammer? They're
Yeah.
both like tricky, aggressive strategies. Of course, you are not playing the same cards. So from like the financial / card availability purposes, they are completely different decks. But it's like, if you like playing Jant a while ago, you can just play 4-color. It's a similar strategy. If you played Standard your whole life and you played control decks, you can play 4-color, or you can play Murktide. If you are playing like a combo deck your whole life, you can try Yagmoth, you can try Living End, you can try some of those shitty decks that Sodek loves so much. Like, I think it's just, you have to attach more to an archetype than a certain deck at this point, if you really want to be successful. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of true. The only thing I'm thinking about right now is that, I was trying to think the opposite way. Imagine a really good player who keeps playing decks from lower tiers. For instance, I was thinking about Xenoan, who plays Glimpse combo, who played Asmo turns with Time Sieve, and he always plays something out of the box, and he finds it successful somehow. So, after I try to not fall into the trap of my own thinking and my own
Bias.
bias of that I know more than someone else. Like, I still strongly believe that there are decks that can surprise everyone, and decks that they are a bit better than everyone thinks that they are. For instance, I think that Red Black Scam is a deck that has a lot of potential, and like 2 players on MTG had really good results with it. But if more players could play more of it, then the results will come, and maybe we would have it on the list somewhere.
Yes, Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a pretty great card. And
True.
it's pretty underutilized in Modern.
So after all, if you are playing your wacky strategy, but you still have success with it, sure, go for it. But if you want to go an easy route on easy mode, just play one of the best decks.
Also, what you said about decks that Xenoan plays, like, their decks can do powerful things, and my biggest gripe is with decks that are just simply underpowered. Like, if Glimpse does its thing, it will win. If Asmo turns does its thing, you will win. But if Humans play their perfect curve, it won't be good enough quite often these days. That's the problem. Like these decks are just not good enough with their good draws.
Yeah, like I also think about Merfolk at the moment.
Or Merfolk, or Deventaxes, or whatever. Like, these decks are just not good enough.
Or Mill. Mill is like
Or Mill, yeah.
Like Mill was a deck that with lures around, it was considered sometimes really well positioned. It could win tournaments at Stera. Now it's gone, basically gone.
Yeah, it was mostly good against other lures decks, right?
Yeah,
Like,
and
it was good against specifically Hammer, which was really important back then. Okay.
yeah, that's true.
Do we want to even say something about Blue-White other than it's not great?
Other than it's after all these months and years, it's still as clunky as it was.
Yes.
I like Blue-White being Blue-White, and if you are Wafotapa, sure play it, but if you are not, then there are other easier ways to play your draw go. For instance, you play Murktide, and
Yes.
that's better.
Okay. But I'll say that I will play Blue-White next week.
In Pioneer.
On Monday. In Pioneer. Because they banned iteration. And I went 0-3 with Blue-Red control yesterday. I lost to Blue-White twice. And I lost a mirror, so I basically went 0-2. And Harry 13 actually made the finals of the showcase with Blue-White, and it looked surprisingly not cringe. It didn't have Yorion. It had a pretty coherent plan, so maybe it's finally the day I believe in Blue-White again. We'll see. Okay, and that's it from us. Anything else to say?
Maybe one day we'll end like below 1 hour. Maybe.
I really wanted to end like 10 minutes ago, but you kept on going. So
Sorry.
But yeah. If you are just watching us now on YouTube and you haven't checked our Patreon stuff, this is where we are for now doing most of our things. We will have some exciting updates in the next few weeks for people who are following our content. But for now, and I guess after we announce those things, links still will be in the description below. So yeah, go check them out. And we'll see you when we see you. Take care and bye-bye.
See ya.